Sign the $11 million over to your brother." My father's voice cracked across the dining room like a rifle shot. Nobody moved. Not my mother. Not my brother. Not even the family lawyer sitting quietly at the far end of the table. The grandfather clock against the wall ticked once. Twice. Then I heard myself laugh. Not because anything was funny. Because after 56 years in this family, after 3 combat deployments, after 31 years in the United States Army, after watching grown men bleed out in deserts halfway around the world, I genuinely thought I had heard everything. Apparently I was wrong. My brother Michael leaned back in his chair and folded his arms, already smiling like a man waiting for someone else to hand him the winning lottery ticket. My mother reached for her wine glass. My father stared at me. Waiting. Expecting. Demanding. The same way he always had. "Dad," I said carefully, "did I hear you correctly?" "You heard me." His jaw tightened. "The money belongs in this family." The room smelled faintly of roasted chicken and furniture polish. Outside Texas, sunlight stretched across the pasture beyond the windows. Inside, something cold settled into my stomach. Because suddenly I realized this wasn't a discussion. It was an ambush. And before that day ended, my mother would slap me. My father would scream loud enough to shake the walls. My brother would expose secrets he'd spent years hiding. And a family lawyer would ask one simple question that would destroy everything they thought they knew. But at that moment, none of us understood that yet. Not even me. My name is Rebecca Carter. I'm a colonel in the United States Army. I've spent most of my adult life leading soldiers, making impossible decisions, carrying responsibilities that would keep most people awake at night. Yet somehow the hardest battlefield I ever walked onto wasn't overseas. It was my own family. I grew up outside Waco, Texas, back when summers felt endless and every family gathering revolved around barbecue, church, and football. My father, Richard Carter, believed 2 things more strongly than anything else in the world. Family came first, and his son could do no wrong. Michael was 3 years older than me, golden-haired, charismatic, naturally charming, the kind of boy teachers adored and neighbors bragged about. If Michael forgot homework, it was because he was busy. If I forgot homework, it was because I wasn't responsible enough. If Michael got a B, everyone celebrated. If I got a B, my father wanted to know what happened to the A. Funny how children learn their place long before they understand the rules. By 12, I knew mine perfectly. Michael was the future. I was the backup plan. My mother wasn't cruel, at least not in the obvious ways. Susan Carter believed she was protecting Harmony. The problem was Harmony always seemed to require my sacrifice. When Michael wrecked Dad's truck at 17, I spent my summer helping pay for repairs. When Michael dropped out of college after 2 semesters, everyone talked about how difficult the transition had been for him. When I graduated top of my class, Dad missed the ceremony because Michael had a fishing tournament. Little things. Tiny cuts. The kind people dismiss individually. But enough tiny cuts can still make someone bleed. At 18, I joined the Army. Mostly because it was the first place nobody cared that Michael existed. The Army judged performance. Not family hierarchy. Not favoritism. Not who your father loved more. I discovered something surprising there. I was good at it. Very good. Leadership came naturally. Discipline came naturally. Responsibility had practically been forced into me since childhood. Years turned into decades. Assignments became promotions. Promotions became command positions. Eventually, Colonel Rebecca Carter appeared on office doors and official paperwork. But back home, I was still Rebecca. Still the quiet daughter. Still the unmarried one. Still the one expected to accommodate everyone else. I rarely corrected them. Maybe that sounds strange. Maybe it sounds weak. But after enough years, you stop chasing recognition from people determined not to see you. Peace becomes easier. Or at least that's what you tell yourself. 3 months before everything fell apart, I visited my grandfather, Thomas Carter, 88 years old, former rancher, former Marine, the only person in my family who ever looked at me and seemed to understand what was underneath the surface. He was sitting on the porch when I arrived, watching the sunset, a glass of iced tea resting beside him. "You look tired," he said. "That's because I'm tired." He laughed softly. "No, you're soul tired." I remember smiling. "Is that a medical diagnosis?" "It's an old man diagnosis." We sat quietly for a while. The Texas sky turned orange, then purple, then blue. Finally, he asked a question that surprised me. "Do you know why people disappoint us?" I shrugged. "Because they're human." "No." He stared toward the horizon. "Because we spend too much time believing they'll eventually become who we need them to be." The words lingered longer than I expected. That's oddly specific. Most truth is, I didn't understand what he meant. Not then. Looking back now, I think he already knew something. Maybe not everything, but enough. Grandpa Thomas passed away 11 weeks later, peacefully, in his sleep. The funeral drew relatives from 3 different states. Michael cried loudly. My mother cried quietly. My father barely cried at all. I stood beside the casket and remembered fishing trips, old stories, and a man who treated me like I mattered. Then life moved forward. Or so I thought. Until a Wednesday afternoon 6 weeks later. I was finishing paperwork at Fort Belvoir when my phone rang. My mother's name appeared on the screen. That alone felt unusual. She normally communicated through group texts. Rebecca, "Hi, Mom. Your father wants everyone at the ranch Saturday." Something in her voice sounded strange. Tight. Controlled. What's going on? Family business? That's vague. Just be here. Then she hung up. No explanation. No details. Nothing. I sat staring at the phone for several seconds. Across the office, my executive officer glanced up. "Everything okay, ma'am?" Probably. But the answer felt hollow. That night I barely slept. Not because I was worried. Because I had a feeling. A small one. The kind older people learn not to ignore. Saturday arrived warm and bright. I drove 4 hours through Texas countryside. Past cattle fields. Past weathered barns. Past memories. The closer I got to the ranch, the heavier everything felt. When I finally turned into the gravel driveway, I immediately noticed something strange. There were too many cars. My brother's truck. My parents' SUV. 2 unfamiliar sedans. One of them black. Professional looking. Lawyer looking. The feeling in my stomach tightened. I parked and stepped out into the afternoon heat. The house looked exactly the same. White paint. Wide porch. American flag moving gently in the breeze. Home. Or at least the place that used to feel like home. Before I reached the front door, it opened. My father stood there, waiting, not smiling, not welcoming, just waiting. Behind him I could see Michael, my mother, and a gray-haired man in a suit, holding a leather folder. The family lawyer. Something was wrong. Very wrong. And for the first time in my life, I had no idea just how wrong it was about to become. The moment I stepped into the dining room, I knew this wasn't a family gathering. It was a tribunal. The long oak table that had hosted Thanksgiving dinners, birthday cakes, and countless Sunday lunches now felt strangely unfamiliar. My father sat at the head. My mother occupied her usual seat beside him. Michael lounged comfortably on the opposite side, one arm draped across the back of his chair. And at the far end sat the attorney, Robert Henderson, our family's lawyer for nearly 20 years. The leather folder resting in front of him immediately caught my attention. Lawyers never brought folders to happy meetings. "Rebecca," my father said, "sit down." No hug. No small talk. No questions about my drive. Just an order. I pulled out a chair and sat. For a moment nobody spoke. The grandfather clock in the corner ticked softly. Outside, a tractor hummed somewhere across a neighboring property. Normal sounds? Ordinary sounds. The kind that make uncomfortable silence feel even heavier. Finally, Robert cleared his throat. "Thank you all for coming." My father nodded. "Go ahead." The attorney opened his folder carefully. The paper inside looked thick, official, important. Suddenly I thought of Grandpa Thomas, his weathered hands, his quiet wisdom, the way he'd always seemed to notice things everyone else missed. A strange ache moved through my chest. Robert adjusted his glasses. "As everyone here knows, Thomas Carter's estate has completed probate review." My mother folded her hands tightly. Michael shifted forward. My father remained perfectly still. The attorney continued. "After taxes, asset valuation, land holdings, mineral rights investments, and associated trusts, the estate's current value is approximately $11 million. Nobody reacted, which told me they already knew. I was the only person hearing this for the first time. Interesting. Very interesting," Robert continued. "Mr. Carter left detailed instructions regarding distribution." My father nodded once. Michael smiled faintly. Something felt wrong. Not legally wrong, emotionally wrong. Like everyone in the room had already rehearsed this conversation. The attorney opened another document. Then he looked directly at me. "Under the terms of the will, the sole beneficiary of Thomas Carter's estate is Rebecca Carter." Silence. Complete silence. For several seconds, I genuinely thought I had misunderstood him. "Excuse me," Robert glanced down at the paperwork. "The entire estate transfers to you." I stared at him, then at my father. Then at Michael. Nobody looked surprised. which meant they already knew this too. My stomach tightened. Because suddenly I understood. The inheritance wasn't the meeting. The inheritance was the problem. Michael leaned back slowly. The smile disappeared. My mother looked down at the table. My father exhaled through his nose. Long. Controlled. Then he spoke. Sign it over. Just like that. No explanation. No discussion. No congratulations. No acknowledgement whatsoever. Sign it over. I blinked. What? My father's voice hardened. Sign the inheritance over to your brother. The words landed so absurdly that for a second I thought he was joking. Then I saw his face. He wasn't joking. Not even slightly. I looked toward Michael. He didn't seem embarrassed, or surprised, or uncomfortable. He simply sat there waiting, like a man expecting delivery of something he'd already purchased. I laughed softly, a genuine laugh. Not because anything was funny, because reality had become ridiculous. You can't be serious, Michael spoke for the first time. Becky. Don't call me Becky. The room tightened instantly. Nobody in my family knew how much I hated that nickname, because nobody had ever bothered asking. My father leaned forward. Your brother has a family. There it was. The argument. The same one I'd heard in different forms for decades. Michael needed. Michael deserved. Michael mattered. And I asked. My mother finally spoke. Rebecca, you don't need that kind of money. I stared at her. I don't... No, her voice softened, almost pleading. You've always taken care of yourself. I almost smiled. The logic was fascinating. Because I'd worked hard. Because I'd sacrificed. Because I'd been responsible. I therefore deserved less. Michael deserved more because he'd done the opposite. Remarkable. My father continued. Michael has children. He also has a job. My brother shifted uncomfortably. A struggling job. Whose fault is that? The question escaped before I could stop it. The room immediately chilled. Michael's face darkened. My father slammed his hand against the table. Watch yourself. I looked at him calmly. No, Dad, let's talk honestly. Nobody moved. Nobody interrupted. 30 years in the army teaches you something useful. You stop fearing uncomfortable rooms. I spent 31 years serving this country. My voice remained steady. I missed birthdays, holidays, weddings, funerals. My father rolled his eyes. Here we go. The gesture hit harder than it should have. Because even now, even after all these years, part of me still wanted his approval. Pathetic, isn't it? At 56 years old, some wounds remain children. My mother folded her arms. Nobody asked you to join the army. No. I nodded. They didn't. The silence stretched. Then I asked a question. When was the last time any of you asked what I wanted? Nobody answered. Because nobody could. My father recovered first. This isn't about feelings. No, I said quietly. It's about money. He pointed toward Michael. It's about family. Interesting. Because family always seemed to mean Michael, never me. Robert Henderson remained silent throughout all of this, watching, observing, like a man waiting for a train wreck he already knew was coming. Michael suddenly leaned forward. Look, Rebecca. There was irritation in his voice now, not gratitude, not humility, expectation. You know Grandpa would have wanted me to take care of the land. I stared at him. Did Grandpa tell you that? His eyes shifted. Tiny movement. But enough? No, of course not. Because Grandpa hadn't left it to him. Grandpa had left it to me. For a reason. My father stood suddenly. The chair scraped loudly across hardwood floors. You are being selfish. The accusation almost took my breath away. Selfish. The woman who spent decades helping everyone else. Selfish. The daughter who showed up whenever someone needed help. Selfish. The word felt so absurd I nearly laughed again. Instead, I looked directly at him. Then I said the one word nobody in that room expected. No. The room froze. My mother's eyes widened. Michael stared. My father went completely still. Because I'd spent my entire life accommodating, compromising, yielding, absorbing. And suddenly I wasn't. No, I repeated. I will not sign anything. My mother's face changed instantly. Not disappointment. Not sadness. Anger. Pure anger. She rose so quickly her chair nearly tipped backward. Rebecca. The warning in her voice felt familiar. Childhood familiar. The tone mothers use when they believe obedience is still automatic. I remained seated. No. The slap came so fast I barely saw it. 1 second she stood across from me. The next her palm crashed against my face. The impact echoed through the room. Sharp. Sudden. Humiliating. The taste of copper touched my tongue. Nobody moved. Nobody breathed. My mother pointed directly at me, her hand trembling. You don't have a choice. The words hung in the air, heavy, ugly. And for the first time all afternoon, Robert Henderson finally looked up from his paperwork. His expression had changed completely. Slowly, very slowly, he removed his glasses. Then he looked directly at my mother and asked a question that made the color drain from her face. Mrs. Carter? His voice was calm, almost gentle. Are you absolutely certain about that? Nobody spoke after Robert Henderson asked the question. My mother's hand remained suspended in the air for a second before she slowly lowered it. The sting on my cheek still burned. Not terribly, not physically, emotionally. Because when you're 56 years old and your mother slaps you across the face in front of your entire family, the pain isn't in the impact. It's in the realization. The realization that some people will always choose control over love. My father looked irritated. Not shocked, not embarrassed. Irritated, like the attorney had interrupted a business meeting. What exactly is that supposed to mean? He demanded. Robert folded his glasses carefully. It means, he said, that Mrs. Carter should be very careful before claiming Colonel Carter has no choice. Colonel Carter. Not Rebecca. Not Becky. Colonel Carter. Funny how one title changed the atmosphere. My mother crossed her arms. This is ridiculous. Robert ignored her. Instead, he opened another section of the file. Several documents appeared. Then several more. Far more paperwork than should have existed for a simple inheritance transfer. A strange feeling settled into my chest. The same feeling I used to get before operations overseas. Not fear, expectation. The sense that hidden information was about to surface. My father leaned forward. What are we doing here, Robert? The attorney looked up. Following your father's instructions. That got everyone's attention, even Michael's. My grandfather had been dead nearly 4 months. Yet somehow he had just entered the room again. Robert slid a sealed envelope onto the table. Cream-colored. My grandfather's handwriting stretched across the front. For Rebecca. Only if they ask. The room went completely silent. My heartbeat slowed. I recognized the handwriting immediately. The sharp T. The narrow R. The precise lettering of a man who spent 80 years doing things carefully. My father frowned. What is that? Robert answered calmly. A contingency letter? Nobody liked that answer. Especially not my father. What contingency? Robert's eyes moved toward me. The one your father anticipated. My stomach tightened. Because suddenly I remembered that final conversation on Grandpa's porch. Do you know why people disappoint us? Because we spend too much time believing they'll eventually become who we need them to be. At the time, I thought he was talking about life. Now I wondered if he'd been talking about my family. My family. His family. The same family currently sitting around this table. Robert pushed the envelope toward me. You should read it. My hands felt strangely steady as I opened it. The paper inside was folded twice. The ink slightly faded. I unfolded it carefully. Then I began reading. Rebecca, if you're reading this, then Richard and Michael have already asked for the money. My father's face immediately changed. The room felt smaller. Tighter. I continued. If they are demanding instead of asking, then matters have likely become worse than I feared. Michael shifted uncomfortably. My mother stared at the table. Nobody interrupted. Nobody could. Your brother is not a bad man. But he is a careless one. And careless men become dangerous when other people keep rescuing them. The words landed like stones. Heavy. Accurate. Unavoidable. I glanced toward Michael. For the first time all afternoon he looked nervous. Not angry. Nervous. Interesting. The letter continued. Your father spent 30 years protecting Michael from consequences. Your mother spent 30 years protecting your father from guilt. Neither helped him. Neither helped you. My father's jaw tightened. You don't need to keep reading that. I looked directly at him, then kept reading. For years I watched the same pattern repeat. Michael failed. You paid. Michael struggled. You sacrificed. Michael made mistakes. Everyone expected Rebecca to understand. A silence settled over the room unlike anything I'd ever experienced. Because everyone knew it was true. Even my parents. Especially my parents. The difference was they'd spent decades refusing to say it out loud. My throat tightened. Not because Grandpa was revealing anything new. Because somebody had finally seen it. Seen me. All of it. The letter continued. You will eventually learn things about your brother's finances. When that happens, remember this. Compassion is not the same thing as surrender. I stopped reading. Slowly. Very slowly. Then I looked up. Michael had gone pale. My father noticed immediately. The reaction was subtle. Tiny. But I saw it. Years of military command teach you to watch faces. Watch eyes. Watch fear. And my father suddenly looked afraid. Robert Henderson noticed too. His expression remained neutral. Professional. But there was something underneath it. Confirmation. Robert, my father said carefully. What finances? The attorney opened another folder. A thicker one. The moment he did, Michael swore under his breath. My stomach dropped. Not because I understood. Because suddenly I realized Grandpa had, for years. Robert removed several documents. Bank records. Business reports. Financial statements. The kind of paperwork nobody wants appearing unexpectedly during family meetings. Michael sat forward. That's private. No, Robert replied calmly. Not anymore. My father stood again. Michael. No answer. My brother stared at the table. My mother looked confused. Genuinely confused? Which meant one thing. She hadn't known. At least not everything. Robert spoke carefully. Over the last 7 years, Mr. Michael Carter accumulated approximately $4.2 million in business liabilities. Silence. Absolute silence. The grandfather clock ticked. Once. Twice. 3 times. Nobody moved. My father looked like someone had punched him. My mother blinked repeatedly. Michael closed his eyes. I sat completely still. 4.2 million. Million. Not thousand. Million. Robert continued. There are also pending creditor disputes. My father's voice barely worked. Michael. My brother rubbed both hands across his face. It's complicated. There it was. America's favorite phrase before disaster. It's complicated. No, most disasters aren't complicated. Most disasters are ignored, then compounded, then hidden, then discovered. My father took a step backward. Actually backward. Like the information had physical weight. How bad is it? Michael didn't answer. Robert did. Worse than you've been told. The room shifted, not physically, emotionally, because the meeting was no longer about inheritance. Now it was about something else. Something larger. Something Grandpa Thomas had apparently anticipated years before his death. My mother finally found her voice. Why didn't you tell us? Michael laughed once, a bitter sound. Because every time I tried fixing it, it got worse. My father sank slowly into his chair. Older. Suddenly much older. I watched him carefully. For the first time all afternoon, he wasn't looking at me. He wasn't demanding. He wasn't commanding. He was staring at his son. Really staring. Maybe for the first time in years. And what he saw clearly terrified him. Robert closed one folder, then opened another. When he spoke again, his voice had changed. Softer. More deliberate. Mr. Carter's inheritance is not the most important thing Thomas Carter left behind. Nobody answered. Nobody even blinked. The attorney looked directly at my mother, then my father, then Michael. Finally, he looked at me. The most important thing he left behind. He paused. It was the truth. And somehow I knew we had only uncovered the first layer, the truth. Robert Henderson's words lingered in the room long after he spoke them. Nobody moved. Nobody interrupted. Even Michael remained silent. Outside, the afternoon sun had begun drifting lower across the Texas fields. Long shadows stretched across the pasture beyond the windows. Inside, the air felt heavier by the minute. My father looked exhausted. Not physically, spiritually. Like a man who had just discovered a crack in a foundation he'd spent decades pretending was solid. Robert reached into the folder again. Then he removed another envelope. This one was thicker, older, the edges slightly worn. My stomach tightened. Of course there was another letter. Grandpa Thomas had always believed important things should be revealed in layers, never all at once. Like a good rancher checking fences one section at a time, or a Marine clearing a building room by room. Robert placed the envelope in front of me. For Rebecca, final instructions. Nobody spoke. My fingers traced the familiar handwriting. For one brief moment I forgot the inheritance, forgot Michael, forgot my parents. All I could think about was my grandfather sitting alone on his porch during those final months. Watching, observing, preparing. The realization hurt, because even dying he'd still been trying to protect me. I opened the envelope. Inside was another handwritten letter, several photographs, and something that looked suspiciously like military paperwork. My pulse slowed, very slowly. I unfolded the letter. Rebecca, if you've reached this page, then the family is probably fighting. That earned the smallest smile from me. Even dead Grandpa knew us perfectly. I continued reading. If Michael's debts have been revealed, then your father is likely confused. If your mother is angry, she is likely protecting Richard. And if you're sitting quietly, you're probably doing what you've done your entire life, absorbing everyone else's emotions. A lump formed in my throat, because once again he was right. Painfully right. The letter continued. Stop doing that. For the first time all afternoon I laughed. A real laugh. Short. Soft. Unexpected. My father frowned. What? I shook my head. Nothing. But it wasn't nothing. It was the realization that somebody had understood me completely. Not the army. Not my family. Not even me. Grandpa had? I kept reading. Richard spent years believing Michael needed protection. The truth is, Michael needed consequences. You spent years believing you needed recognition. The truth is, you never needed their permission. The room stayed silent. I lowered the letter slightly. My father looked away. That reaction told me everything. Because deep down he knew. He had always known. Maybe not consciously. Maybe not openly. But somewhere inside himself he understood exactly what he'd done. Robert cleared his throat gently. There's more. I looked down. The next section was shorter. Only 3 lines. Your family knows very little about who you actually became. That was intentional. But I think it's time they learn. My eyes narrowed. What? Before I could continue, Robert reached toward the military documents. Then he looked directly at my father. Mr. Carter. My father frowned. What? Did you know your daughter received the Legion of Merit? Silence. Complete silence. My father blinked. The what? Interesting. Very interesting. Robert continued. Did you know she received a Bronze Star? No answer. My mother stared at me. Michael looked confused. Robert wasn't finished. Did you know she commanded over 1,200 personnel during overseas operations? My father looked stunned. The attorney continued calmly. Did you know she advised senior military leadership on strategic operations across multiple theaters? Nobody spoke. The room had become strangely still. Like everyone had suddenly realized there was an entire version of me they'd never bothered meeting. My mother finally whispered. Rebecca. I looked at her. Really looked at her. The woman who gave birth to me. The woman who knew my favorite color when I was 10. My shoe size when I was 15. And apparently almost nothing about my adult life. You never asked. The words weren't angry. That made them worse. Because anger can be argued with. Truth cannot. My father shifted uncomfortably. Well, we knew you were doing well. I almost smiled. Doing well? 31 years reduced to doing well. Robert opened another page. Then his expression softened. Thomas Carter requested these records specifically. My throat tightened. Grandpa had requested them. Years ago. He'd been following my career. Quietly. The way parents are supposed to. The realization nearly broke something inside me. Robert continued reading from another document. Colonel Rebecca Carter demonstrated exceptional leadership under combat conditions. My father lowered his eyes. Colonel Carter successfully coordinated extraction operations involving Allied personnel. My mother looked stunned. Michael stared at me like he'd never seen me before. Maybe he hadn't. Robert turned another page. Colonel Carter received commendations from multiple senior commands. The room remained silent. Then Robert carefully folded the documents. Your grandfather collected these over 20 years. Nobody moved. My chest hurt. Not from pride, from grief. Because suddenly I understood something. Grandpa had known. Every promotion, every assignment, every achievement. He had paid attention. The only person in my family who had. My father swallowed hard. I didn't know. No, I said quietly. You didn't. The silence stretched. Then Michael suddenly slammed his hand onto the table. Oh, come on. Everyone looked at him. His face had turned red. Anger, embarrassment, fear, all mixed together. So what? The room froze. Michael pointed toward me. So she has medals. His voice rose. So she was successful. Another point. Another accusation. So what does that have to do with Grandpa's money? There it was. The real issue. Not family. Not fairness. Money. Always money. I watched him carefully. Then I finally said what I'd spent decades swallowing. Because Grandpa trusted me. Michael stood immediately. You think you're better than us? No. I shook my head. I think Grandpa knew me. That landed harder. Because it was true. My father stood slowly. His face looked different now. Older. Worn. For the first time all afternoon, he wasn't angry. He was ashamed. And somehow that hurt more. I looked at him, then at my mother, then at Michael. 56 years of memories moved through my mind. Every sacrifice, every dismissal, every time I had been expected to understand, to compromise, to absorb, to disappear. Finally I spoke. Quietly, clearly, without raising my voice. For 56 years I've been this family's emergency plan. Nobody interrupted. I was the one who solved problems. Silence. The one who showed up. My father lowered his eyes. The one who sacrificed. My mother looked away. The one who understood. Michael's face tightened. Then I said the sentence that changed everything. But I was never your first choice. The room went completely still. Not because they disagreed. Because they couldn't. And for the first time in my life, nobody asked me to stay quiet. Nobody spoke after that. The silence wasn't uncomfortable anymore. It wasn't tense. It wasn't angry. It was the silence that arrives when a truth has finally been spoken aloud, and nobody knows how to put it back where it came from. Outside the dining room window, the sun had begun sinking toward the horizon. The Texas sky glowed orange and gold across the pasture. I remembered being 8 years old and sitting on this very floor building puzzles while my grandfather drank coffee nearby. Back then I believed families stayed the same forever. Funny how age teaches you otherwise. My father lowered himself slowly into his chair. For the first time all afternoon he looked like an old man. Not Richard Carter. Not the powerful ranch owner. Not the father who always had answers. Just a 78-year-old man staring at the consequences of choices made over decades. My mother sat motionless beside him. Michael remained standing, his hands clenched into fists. Nobody knew what to say. Finally, my father cleared his throat. His voice sounded smaller than I had ever heard it. "Rebecca." I looked at him. He swallowed. Then looked down at the table. Maybe, the word seemed to hurt him. Maybe I made mistakes. Nobody moved. Because that sentence was historic. My father didn't apologize. He explained. He justified. He redirected. But he never admitted mistakes, not once in my entire life, until now. Michael immediately jumped in. "Dad, no." My father held up a hand. The gesture surprised all of us, especially Michael. For decades, my father had interrupted everyone else on Michael's behalf. Now he was interrupting Michael. The irony wasn't lost on me. My father rubbed both hands across his face. "When your mother died," he stopped, looked at me. "My mother." Grandpa Thomas's wife. The grandmother I barely remembered. His voice grew rough. I promised myself I'd protect this family. Nobody spoke. The sunlight shifted lower across the room. Dust floated through golden beams near the window. My father continued. Michael always needed help. A painful smile touched my lips. There it was. The story he'd told himself for 40 years. Michael needed help. Rebecca would be fine. Michael needed protection. Rebecca could handle it. Michael needed support. Rebecca understood. The problem was simple. When one child always receives protection, eventually the other child receives neglect. Not intentionally, but inevitably. My father looked directly at me. And I convinced myself you didn't. The room became very quiet. I believed him. Not because it excused anything, because it felt honest. For the first time, my mother suddenly started crying. Not dramatically, not loudly, just quietly. Like a woman discovering something she should have seen years earlier. I thought we were being fair. The statement broke my heart. Because I think she genuinely believed it. That's the terrible thing about favoritism. The people doing it rarely call it favoritism. They call it helping, supporting, protecting. Meanwhile, someone else slowly disappears. Michael laughed bitterly. So what happens now? Nobody answered immediately. The question lingered in the room. Because everyone understood what he was really asking. What happens to me? Robert Henderson closed his final folder. The inheritance remains Rebecca's. Michael looked sick. The reality was finally becoming unavoidable. No rescue. No miracle. No last-minute transfer. No reward for decades of irresponsibility. Just consequences. The same thing Grandpa Thomas had tried to teach all of us. My brother stared at the table, then at me, then back down. For the first time that day, his anger disappeared. And what replaced it surprised me. Fear. Real fear. The kind grown men hide from themselves. Rebecca. His voice cracked slightly. I hadn't heard that sound since we were children. I'm in trouble. The room remained silent. He wasn't manipulating. Wasn't performing. Wasn't arguing. He was simply telling the truth, maybe for the first time in years. I know. He nodded slowly. His eyes looked tired. Older. Smaller. I don't know how to fix it. I believed that too. For a moment I saw not the golden child, not the favored son, just a frightened man who had spent his entire life expecting someone else to save him. And suddenly I understood something important. Grandpa hadn't left me $11 million to punish Michael. He'd left it to me because he trusted my judgment. There was a difference. A huge difference. I stood slowly. The room immediately focused on me. My father, my mother, Michael, Robert. Everyone waiting. The same way they had waited my entire life, only this time the answer belonged to me. I took a slow breath, then looked directly at Michael. I'm not signing the inheritance over. His face fell. My father closed his eyes. My mother